Hello and welcome to our monthly Q&A podcast, Troubleshooting Zen Study and Practice, and we're now up to recording number 35 and going straight in with this month's question. In a number of talks you have mentioned the form. What is the form and how does it work in practice? So when I began Zen training many years ago, apart from being taught Zazen, or as well as being taught Zazen, that sitting meditation, I was also taught an awful lot about the form. And this term form actually is a translation of the Sanskrit term rupa, which means the physical form in Sanskrit, and is often used to describe a Buddha statue. So a Buddha statue, for example, that sits on an altar is called a Buddha rupa, a Buddha form. It's the physical representation of the Buddha in the meditation hall. Rupa also forms, of course, the first of what's called the five skandhas, which are the five elements that go together to make up what a human being is. Rupa represents the physical form, the physical senses, and also by extension the physical world. The other four skandhas are the psychological skandhas, feeling or sensation, perception, mental formations or volitions, and also sense consciousness. But rupa, again, is that physical form. So it's the physical form or the physical expression of an inward essence or spirit. And in Zen, and certainly in Chinese thinking, there is often a lot of emphasis in the writings of the patriarchs on what is called form and essence. Essence represents the nature of something, the inward nature of something, and the form, rupa, is the physical expression of that. Now, if you just place this in context with regards to the training, the form is very important because it can develop and cultivate the nature of a person can be cultivated. A lot of our nature exists in potential, it has not necessarily been developed. So, for example, a person may have may have a sort of mathematical gift, but unless they actually go and learn mathematics and the rule of mathematics and how to apply it, that gift will not be realized. That gift will not be expressed through the physical form. The same with someone who's a musician, who's musically gifted. If they never learn to sing or to play a musical instrument or to write music, then that potential, that essence, is never developed. So there is an interplay between essence and form, essence being the spirit or the potential of something, and the form is the vehicle of that expression. So and that's very important, and obviously it's very important in the cultivation of wisdom and compassion as well, because wisdom and compassion is expressed through the body, through rupa, through the voice, through behavior. And so form by extension covers all these physical manifestations of that sort of inward essence. So I remember many years ago seeing a documentary of a Sri Lankan Theravadan monk, Ananda Matea was his name, back in the 1970s, and he was being interviewed, and in the interview he would talk about the physical form of the Buddha Rupa, and he said that they use, and indeed this is very true, and it's a useful meditation that might like to try for oneself at home. He said we use the Buddha statues or the Buddha representations. They have in Sri Lanka. They have some of those wonderful Buddha carvings into cliffs, giant carvings of the Buddha, either seated or in the parinirvana, the lying on his right side. And he said we use these rupas, these forms of the Buddha, for meditation. He said when we look at the Buddha's eyes, which are sort of downcast and almost closed but not quite, we meditate on the Buddha's restraint of eyes. When we look on the Buddha's mouth, which is the lips are together and with a slight smile on it, then we practice meditation of restraint of speech and the mouth. And when we look at his hands in the posture, in the style, how contained that he is, and his legs as well, how contained they are, then he is teaching us the restraint of hands and the restraint of the form and the restraint of posture and so forth, and the practice of these things. So I remember another actually contemporary Western Theravadan monk saying, when you're meditating on the form of the Buddha, and by this he meant just sort of simply sitting quietly and contained and allowing one's gaze to fall upon the Buddha Rupa, and to just allow it to become the object or focus of one's contemplation and one's meditation. He said it's impossible to lose one's temper. I can't say I've absolutely tried that out for myself personally, but I have used the forms of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas as well for contemplation. It's a lovely thing to do, and that's because the eyes allow the image to come in, and that begins to cultivate the inner essence, one's own inner essence, which then naturally begins to express itself through one's own form. So perhaps this is what he was talking about. One doesn't want to be sloppy or careless after one has contemplated the forms of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, because they are beautiful. They have an aesthetic that, as it were, is quite infectious in a good way, and can cultivate what's known as bhavana, the same good form in us, even if it's just for a short period of time. So we need to do it often. So the form itself covers, therefore, all these things: the physical expressions, the posture, for example, so how one sits or stands or walks. And these are all things that members of the Sangha, the nuns and the monks, will cultivate. And if you go and live in a temple, then it's the same way. One doesn't just sort of, sit with one's feet upon the chair. Or sit slovenly, sort of with arm draped over the back of the chair or something like that. One has to sit in a contained and upright manner, and it feels very differently. And this was one of the things that in practice we were advised to do when I started practicing, was to experiment with the form. We would practice sitting in a sloppy manner. How does that make you feel after a while? It's quite nice at first, but it's interesting. After a while, there's a restlessness that begins to settle in. Whereas when one sits, for example, in an upright meditation posture, in the formal meditation posture, whether that's on a cushion with the legs crossed or kneeling, or whether one sits on a chair, but sits in a meditation posture on a chair, at first it does feel a bit awkward. But one finds very quickly that once one is used to sitting meditation, it's the most comfortable way to sit meditation for long periods of time. It would be quite hard to sit in a overly relaxed, or slovenly way for hours on end in meditation. In fact, it would be really impossible. Even though the formal postures produce soreness, it's easy to bear in that posture. And this is why these postures have been tried out for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and have been found to work. This is why they're adopted. They're not just, cosmetic. They are extremely practical as well. And they've been tried and tested and handed down to us. And so therefore that's very useful. But it's not just posture it covers. It also governs our behavior. So it governs how we speak and what we say. So if you remember, Ananda Metteyya said, when we look at the Buddha's mouth, we are contemplating, restraint of speech. So there's such a thing as right speech, isn't there? That's one of the steps on the Noble Eightfold Path, the cultivation of right speech, such as truth-telling. But also speech, not just truth-telling, but also speech that may be diplomatic, or speech that is not harsh or cruel or unnecessarily critical or gossipy, for example. All those forms of speech that are warned against in the Buddha's teachings. So it governs, our ethical behavior in speech, and it also governs our good manners as well. And cultivation of good manners is something that is very important, because these practices are seen as ennobling. The term is Arya, which means the noble ones. The term arhats come from it, and the Noble Eightfold Path this uses the same term, Arya. The noble is not something that we're born into. This isn't about being a prince or a princess. This is about cultivating an ennobling practice, a practice that causes us to be fully human and less non-human. If you're familiar with the 6 states on the Wheel of Life, you'll understand that there are 5 non-human states, fighting demons, hungry ghosts, etc. And there's one human one. And the human one is seen to be the best of what it is to be human. That's the definition of that state on the Wheel of Life. And the cultivation of good human manners and good human ethics is what promotes and encourages the seeds of being reborn spiritually and psychologically as well as physically into the human form, into that form which is the best of being human. So obviously it covers ethics too, but of course Rupa can also govern any discipline as well. So people who practice martial arts will also practice good forms. There's a way of standing and a way of sitting and a way of fighting, and all the exercises which they practice again and again, and the moves which they practice again and again. But it's also the same, for a musician, for example. If you're playing, the piano and you're playing classical music or something, there is a form to how you play that too. Which has to be trained in. People who are artists, people who are crafts people. That's the old idea of the apprenticeship, isn't it? If you were a stonemason and you were, carving stones and producing, artwork in stone or wood, or in jewelry or whatever, there is a code by which one does that, all the tricks of the trade, and there are behaviours that go along with that as well. And originally, being an apprentice was seen as formative of character. So when we talk about Rupa, it's a discipline, but it's a discipline that's also formative of character as well. And what I mean by that is that, so for example, if you're a crafts person, and you're carving wood, you need to be able to carve that wood well, to the best of your ability, under all circumstances. Whether you're feeling great that day, whether you're not feeling great that day, if you've had a row with your other half that day, you need to be able to come in, contain all that. That's where the restraint comes in, and still be able to function to the best of your ability. Think about a doctor or a nurse, for example. Other people's lives are in your hands, and you need to be able to function under very pressured circumstances. That requires incredible inner strength, and this is the character formation. This is the ennobling. This is the development, or what's known as bhavana. Bhavana, in this sense, bhavana is another Sanskrit term which means development. It also is translated as meditation, because meditation, rather like meditation on the Buddha, on the forms of the Buddha, it cultivates and develops. It cultivates and develops the heart, the essence, in a certain direction. So rather like the gardener cultivates the garden along certain lines in order to produce an effect further down the timeline. So now, through the practice of discipline, we are cultivating this future becoming. And bhavana literally does mean becoming. and that's what that's one of the functions of the practice of meditation, whether it's meditation on the cushion or meditation in daily life, what's sometimes called mindfulness, along with the ethical practice and along with the wisdom practice. These things together are bhavana. They are developing the future self, which is the arhat or the Buddha, the Buddhahood. This is the future potential being manifested. So don't forget, the rupa is the vehicle by which the essence develops. And if you remember, the Buddha said that all beings are fully and completely endowed with the wisdom and power of the Tathagata. He also said that all beings, and this is an important teaching in Mahayana, that all beings are capable of reaching Buddhahood, and the path between where we are now and Buddhahood in the future is bhavana. It's what we cultivate. So what we cultivate through body, speech, and also mind in the end, but body and speech to start with, is incredibly important. In fact, it's the whole of the practice. So therefore, the practice of the cultivation of good form is also the whole of the practice too. And this shows that there is this interplay, this constant interplay between body and heart, or body and mind, body and consciousness. They are not two separate things. They are a two-way street that are simply two sides of the one coin. And this works out very practically. And I remember many years ago someone coming who had to take an English exam, an oral exam, and exams used to make him really, really nervous. And although he had done the work and he had revised and learned what he needed to learn for the exam, his mind would go blank. And the first time he did the exam, he failed. Not because he didn't know, but because he was so frightened. So he came to us for some advice. And all I said to him was, I want you to practice sitting really still. Don't worry about what your mind does. Just worry about what your body does. And I said, when you go to the exam center, go there, quarter of an hour early or whatever. Sit yourself down. Don't drink a cup of coffee. Don't read a magazine or anything. Just sit, but sit absolutely still. Do not fidget. Now, why did I say that? Because restlessness is the physical expression of a nervous or anxious heart. And I knew perfectly well that if you contained that physical expression of the heart, then the heart will conform to the physical expression. So although the body itself can flash what's in the heart, i.e. if the heart is anxious, then our behavior of body and speech and mind, the thoughts that we have, will be anxious too, and will fidget and will be lost in thought and, fiddling and so forth, and then trying to distract myself and all that sort of business. If we pull that in, if we restrain that, then after a relatively short while, the heart also settles down. Those of you who've practiced some of the Medicine Buddha meditations will also know that when we do the long, slow breathing, the reason we do the long, slow breathing is that it affects the heart. It affects the mood in the heart. If we're feeling anxious or a bit buzzy and we want to settle down, then we breathe as a settled down person would, not as an anxious person would. Anxious people breathe shallow and rapid. Relaxed and calm people breathe deep and slow. So adopt that physical trait, and then the heart will follow as well. So incredibly important subject, and no doubt we'll be looking at it at other aspects of form, because it's a huge topic area. But that hopefully just gives a few pointers for how it works. Thank you. If you yourself have any questions you would like answered, send them over to us at Rinzai, Rinzai, as in Master Rinzai at thezengateway.com, Rinzai at thezengateway.com. You'll find our contact details on our homepage, which is of course thezengateway.com. And don't forget to sign up to our regular newsletter if you want to stay informed of our latest postings. Thank you very much.